When I was in it, I did not see any other path. I did not see any other journey in life. Dead or in prison is where I'd be if I hadn't have got out of it. I was probably 13, 14 years old. That's when it started turning into something that was more recognizable as a gang. County lines, for me, is something that involves nearly always vulnerable young people who are victims of criminal grooming. My upbringing was pretty difficult, really, particularly in like my early years. That had quite a huge impact on who I became as a young boy and eventually as a young man. As a teenager, I was quite like lost, really, and externally quite angry and violent, really. A lot of people would have said that I was like fearless and I did things that were difficult for people to comprehend. Really, I was full of fear in my life. I eventually, over time, found myself involved in what you would now call county lines. It was men that were coming from London and dropping off drugs and getting me to sell and hold on to drugs, doing their dirty work so that they never really had to be involved in the side of it that would, that had the severe consequences of, being caught as a drug dealer. Where we used to hang around was like a park next to a big field, and they would often turn up there. That's where they would drop off the drugs and that's where they would take the money from us. On the one hand, I was always scared, and deep down I knew that it was wrong and I knew that it was something that I didn't want to be involved in. But on the other hand, I did feel like I was part of something. I felt like I was wanted and like I was needed, feeling like at least there were people that had my back. I had a sense of how dangerous it was, but there was part of me that was attracted to that danger, and I think that's part of the problem. As you got deeper and deeper in, everything became more polarized. So the fear became more exciting, but it also became more terrifying, and the more and more it did become something that was making me feel deeply trapped.
You need me to protect you, and I need you to run drugs.
My name is Billy Price, and I play Sid Sumner. Yeah, I did know a little bit about county lines. We obviously had to do a lot of research and find out more about it.
You're not selling drugs.
Yeah, you're right. I shouldn't even ask, sorry. Besides, it'd be better who's a girl anyway. Everyone loves a pretty face.
I think you ask a lot of questions when you're doing the script, only because you have to kind of put yourself into a place to play that character.
Watching the storyline with Sid, it was actually quite emotional. Like, I remember sitting and watching the hour-long episode, particularly when they traveled on the train. The roller coaster of emotions that they went through was like really relatable, that kind of wanting to get out, but then in certain moments, getting caught up in it all and almost enjoying it. It kind of made me realize, genuinely made me realize kind of how serious it was for me, because up until I see it play out in that way, it'd always just sort of been my life.
Now go on. You got a train to catch, yeah?
Billy.
Hello, mate, how are you?
Good, mate. Good to finally meet you. The way that you kind of get tangled up in this stuff, it's not like a clear line that you just cross over, do you know what I mean? It started off as hanging about down the park, and then we started smoking weed originally.
At 11, 12.
I was probably 12 when I started smoking. And then once you start dabbling in things like cannabis and stuff like that, then you are, obviously, the next step is searching for ways to get hold of it.
Because it's kind of like a gateway drug.
The gateway really would be internal struggle, and I believe young people face internal struggles because of their experiences as children growing up. A lot of people talk about falling into the wrong crowd, right?
Yeah.
The one thing that I would say is that, one, we didn't fall. I went to that crowd because I was searching for something. I didn't know it at the time. Subconsciously, I was searching for something. And two, it wasn't really the wrong crowd. It was like my people. We were all the kids that were struggling with something. We connected over our kind of mutual struggle.
How did it go from just smoking a bit of cannabis with your friends to, selling it and getting into these gangs?
When I first started selling cannabis in the way that I did, it wasn't even about the money. It was about the street cred and that feeling like I was somebody. When we were hanging about down the park, you start mixing, because You want to go to the next level. You get hooked on the prestige thing. I grew up in a place called Swindon, which was an hour trip from London, and then some lads started coming from London. Now, by this time, I'm like 13, 14, and they were like 17, 18, 19.
Yeah.
When you're 14, 15, 17, 18, 19, it's like a man.
Oh, it's like a huge step up.
Yeah, it's
100%.
like a man, yeah? And so I started hanging about around them, and the first thing they started to get me to do was like hold cannabis for them and start selling cannabis. And then all of a sudden I went from somebody who was like, would get a little bit of like weed and sell it, to I'm selling cannabis for people in London. I don't know if you know the film Scarface, but like I used to watch that and feel like I'm gonna be Tony Montana when I'm older. I'm gangster. Yeah. I didn't see it at the time, right? All I saw was that there was men, as I saw it, men that made me feel like somebody. I had a girlfriend at the time and I used to walk to a house, it was like a 20-minute walk from my house, yeah. And they rang me and it was like 10 o'clock at night and I had school the next day and that. And I was going home and I thought, I don't wanna, if they want me to do something, I don't wanna. So I answered the phone and I was like, I said, listen, I'm with my mum, so I can't do anything now. And they came out in the car around the corner, they'd been watching me. And they jumped out and it was all like scaring me and that and saying, don't ever lie to us again. And they took me to this like retail park in where I lived in Swindon. And they walked me around to the back of the car and they opened the boot and I watched them put a pool cue together, right? And then they put a bag over my head and then they held something to the back of my head. Now, I never saw the gun, but they said they were talking about holding the gun. And then they walked me up, I now know, up into the shrubbery, into the bushes at the back.
With a bag over your head?
With a bag over my head and something pushed in the back of my head, right? And I was just walking. So they walked me up into the bush and then they counted to 3 and I just thought, that's it, this is it, it's over, right? On the count of 3, I'm gone. And then on the third, when they got to 3, they ripped the bag off my head and they all started laughing, right? Of course, then you're like, I'm in a daze, yeah?
You don't know what's going on.
I don't know what's going on. And then basically, they took me to get a kebab, and they said, look, they were like, you passed the test, right? You passed the test. No, everybody runs the first time, you never ran. So then I've gone from being terrified of thinking what's gonna happen to me, to like, I am an absolute don.
Where did that then go from feeling on top of the world just to...
One minute you felt like the absolute don, yeah?
Yeah.
But then the next minute you'd be back to who you were. Like when I was with the girl that I was with or whatever it was at the time, you know, you go back, I went back to being that teenager. And it was in those moments, or if I was at home and sat down with my mum and stuff like that, that's when you had them moments where you knew it wasn't right, yeah? And you always, when you come back to yourself, you always wanted to get out of it.
How do you get out of something like that when they're watching you, when they're following you, when they're putting bags over your head?
So I was very lucky in that the 3 main lads got arrested in London. And
All 3 of them?
Yeah, and they just stopped coming.
And that was just your way out?
And that was like very lucky to kind of get out in that way.
Like anyone who's been affected by gangs and stuff, like, how would you give them hope? What would you say to them?
You will be treated as a victim that's been groomed, right? So I think that's really important to kind of highlight for people. So there is always an out, and there is people that are kind of looking to support you. And the second thing that I would say as well is to people that might know somebody. If you know somebody that you feel like's trapped in it, if you came forward and spoke to somebody about it, you're not a snitch, you're not a grass, you're being a good friend who's helping out somebody who's trapped.
Well, Josh, mate, honestly, it's been a pleasure to talk to you today.
No, I appreciate it. And I think, listen, being able to do this storyline, it's going to reach a lot of people. Dead or in prison is where I'd be if I hadn't got out of it. I think one of the most important things that I could say to anyone that might be trapped in any kind of gang culture, particularly county lines, is I know that when I was in it, I did not see any other path. I did not see any other journey in life. You can learn and grow and become a human being that can be of value to the world. My life has been proof that this doesn't have to be a life sentence. My life has been proof that there's always hope.
If you've been affected by it or would like any more information on the issues discussed in this episode, please visit channel4.com/support.